So we are entering the city of Bath, Michigan. It's been almost 96 years since the deadliest school attack in the United States history. It's called the Bath School bombing, otherwise known as the Bath School Massacre. It happened on May 18th, 1927, claiming 44 lives, 38 which were the school children, which were in the school at the time of the bombing. We're approaching the original cupola that was on top of Bath Consolidated School. It survived the explosion, and it was then placed upon a new school called James Couzens School, and it was on top of that school until 1975, I believe. That school was torn down, and now we are in the location of James Couzens Memorial Park, and they have the cupola here as a memorial to the Bath Massacre. So we are now at the entrance of Mount Rest Cemetery in St. John's, Michigan. We are going to be looking for the gravesite of Andrew Kehoe. The Bath School Massacre was a series of violent attacks perpetrated by Andrew Kehoe upon the Bath Consolidated School in Bath, Michigan on May 18, 1927. The attacks killed 38 elementary school children and 6 adults, injured at least 58 other people. Prior to his timed explosive detonating at Bath School building, Andrew Kehoe had murdered his wife, Nellie Price Kehoe, and firebombed his own farm. Arriving at the site of the school explosion, Andrew Kehoe died when he set off explosive concealed in his truck. Andrew Kehoe, the 55-year-old school board treasurer, was angered by increased taxes and his defeat in the 1926 election for township clerk. He was thought by locals to have planned his murderous revenge after that public defeat. Kehoe had a reputation for difficulty on the school board and in personal dealings. In addition, he was notified that his mortgage was going to be foreclosed upon. For much of the next year, until the massacre, Andrew Kehoe purchased explosives and secretly hid them on his property and under the school. On the day of the disaster, Andrew Kehoe set off almost simultaneous explosions at his home, farmstead, and at the Bath School building. His devices destroyed his own farm buildings and ripped through the north wing of the Bath School building. As rescuers began working at the school, Andrew Kehoe drove up to the schoolyard and triggered an explosion in his shrapnel-filled truck. The blast killed Andrew Kehoe plus 4 other people. During the rescue and recovery efforts, searchers discovered an additional 500 pounds of unexploded dynamite in the south wing of the school that had been set off to go at the same time the initial explosion in the north wing. Andrew Kehoe had apparently intended to destroy the entire school and everyone in it. Andrew Philip Kehoe was born in Tecumseh, Michigan on February 1st, 1872, into a family of 13 children. After graduating high school, he studied electrical engineering at Michigan State College in East Lansing and then moved to St. Louis, Missouri, where he worked as an electrician for several years. Kehoe married Nellie Price in 1912 at the age of 40. 7 years after, they moved to a farm outside of Bath Township. Andrew Kehoe said to be dependable, doing favors and volunteer work for his neighbors. He was also described as having a bad temper and being notoriously impatient with any disagreement. He had also shot and killed a neighbor's dog that had come onto his property and annoyed him by barking. He had also beaten one of his horses to death when it did not perform to his expectations. Andrew Kehoe had a reputation for also being frugal, and he was elected in 1924 as a trustee on the school board for 3 years and treasurer for 1 year. He argued strongly for lower taxes, and later the superintendent of the board said that he fought the expenditure of money that for most unnecessary equipment. Andrew Kehoe was considered difficult to work with, even voting against the rest of the board, wanting his own way and arguing with the township financial authorities. He protested that he paid too much in taxes and tried to get the valuation of his property reduced so he would pay less. The Bath Township school tax had been increased nearly double between 1922 and 1926. In June 1926, Andrew Kehoe was notified that the widow of his wife's uncle, who also held the mortgage on his property, had begun foreclosure. Following the disaster, the local sheriff who had served the foreclosure notice reported that Kehoe had muttered, "If it hadn't been for that $300 school tax, I might have paid off this mortgage." The mortgage holder had also reported that Andrew Kehoe had stated, "If I can't live in that house, no one else will." Andrew Kehoe was appointed in 1925 as temporary town clerk, but he was defeated in April 1926 election for that office. This public rejection by the community angered him. By the time of the bombing, Andrew Kehoe's wife, Nellie, had become chronically ill with what resembled tuberculosis, for which there was no effective treatment or cure for at that time. Her frequent hospital stays may have contributed to the family's debt. Andrew Kehoe had stopped making mortgage and homeowners insurance payments. There is no clear indication of when Andrew Kehoe had the idea of massacring the school children and the townspeople, but a neighbor thought that he conceived his plan after being defeated in the 1926 clerk election. The consensus of the townspeople was that he had worked on his plan at least since the previous August. One of the Bath School Board members was quoted by the New York Times as saying, "I have no doubt that he made his plans last fall to blow up the school. He was an experienced electrician, and the board employed him in November to make some repairs on the school lighting system. He had ample opportunity then to plant the explosives and lay the wires for touching it off." Andrew Kehoe had free access to the school building during the summer vacation of 1926. From mid-1926, he began buying more than a ton of explosives. Neighbors reported hearing explosions on the farm, with one of them calling him the dynamite farmer. Prior to the day of the disaster, Andrew Kehoe had loaded the back seat of his truck with metal debris capable of producing shrapnel during an explosion. He also bought a new set of tires for his truck to avoid breaking down when transporting the explosives. Kehoe's wife, Nellie, was discharged from the hospital on May 16th. She was murdered by her husband sometime between her release and the bombings that occurred 2 days later. Andrew Kehoe put her body in a wheelbarrow at the rear of the farm's chicken coop, where it was found in a heavily charred condition after the farm explosions and the fire. At approximately 8:45 a.m. on Wednesday, May 18th, Andrew Kehoe detonated the fire alarms in his house and farm buildings, causing some debris to fly onto a neighbor's poultry brooding house. The classes at Bath Consolidated School began at 8:30 a.m. Kehoe had set his alarm clock in the basement of the school's north wing, which detonated at the dynamite that he had hidden there at about 8:45 a.m. Rescuers heading to the scene of the Kehoe farm fire heard the explosions at the school building and turned back in that direction. Parents within the rural community rushed to the school. The school building resembled a war zone, with 38 people killed in the initial explosion. Mostly were children. Here are some eyewitness accounts reported by the local newspaper. The sky seemed to be full of children and flying desks and books. It felt like an earthquake. Children were tossed high in the air. Some were catapulted out of the building. Mother after mother came running into the schoolyard and demanded information about their children. Many, then seeing the lifeless forms lying on the lawn, sobbed and screamed. In no time, more than 100 men were at work tearing away debris from the school, and nearly as many women were frantically pawing over timber and broken bricks for traces of their children. There were accounts of women lifting clusters of bricks held together by mortar, heavier than the average man could have handled without a crowbar. The north wing of the school had collapsed, leaving the edge of the roof on the ground. There were children crushed underneath. Kehoe drove up to the school about a half an hour after the explosion. He saw the superintendent of the school and summoned him over to his truck. Andrew Kehoe then detonated the explosives stored in his truck, immediately killing himself, the superintendent, a local farmer, and an 8-year-old second grader. The second grade boy had survived the first blast and then wandered out of the school building. He was then killed by shrapnel from the exploding vehicle. The truck explosion spread debris over a large area that caused extensive damage to cars parked a half a block away, with their roofs catching on fire from the burning gasoline. It injured several others and mortally wounded the postmaster, who had lost his leg and died before making it to the hospital. Telephone operators stayed at their stations for hours to summon doctors, undertakers, area hospital workers, and anyone else who might help. A local physician and his wife, who was a nurse, turned their Bath Township drugstore into a triage center. The dead bodies were taken to the town hall, which was used as a morgue. During the search for survivors and victims, rescuers found an additional 500 pounds of dynamite, which had failed to detonate in the south wing of the school. The search was halted to allow the state police to disarm the devices, and they had found an alarm clock set to go off at 8:45 a.m. Investigators speculated that the initial explosion may have caused a short circuit in the second set of bombs, preventing them from detonating. Police and fire officials gathered at the Kehoe farm to investigate the fires there. State troopers had searched for Nellie Kehoe throughout Michigan, thinking she may be at a tuberculosis sanatorium, but her charred remains were found the day after the disaster among the ruins of the farm. All the Kehoe farm buildings were destroyed. Kehoe's 2 horses had burned to death, trapped inside the barn. Their carcasses were found with their legs tied together with wire, preventing their escape or rescue. Investigators found a wooden sign wired to the farm's fence with Kehoe's last message stenciled in it. "Criminals are made, not born." Kehoe's body was claimed by one of his sisters and was buried in an unmarked grave in the pauper section of Mount Rest Cemetery in St. John's, Michigan. The Price family buried Nellie Price Kehoe in Lansing Cemetery under her maiden name. All right, so we are here in the paupers section of the cemetery where Andrew Kehoe was buried. He is in a unmarked grave, so he's in this section somewhere. There's no headstone or anywhere to know where he is definitely located. I'm not a fan of giving notoriety to murderers, but this is where we are, and this is what we came to see. Some of you might want to see it. So this is the area where he is buried.